Good morning, afternoon, ASIJ Mustang community. Thank you for your patience as we get started. We see the participant list growing as we go. We will get started shortly, but we'll just take a few minutes to just let everybody connect into the Zoom call, and then we will get going with our discussion here with Jamie Andrew. So just be patient. We'll get going in just a moment. Good afternoon, Mustangs. We're just going to take just a quick minute as we let people enter in. We still see the participant list growing rapidly, so we'll just give it a minute. Thank you so much for being prompt and on time as we await to hear from Jamie. But again, thank you so much for coming. We'll just take a minute before we get started to just let everybody hop on to our webinar. Good afternoon, Mustangs. We're still going to take a quick minute to wait for everything to kind of settle down as far as people entering. I think people are still hopping on to the Zoom call. We're now looking at almost 300 individuals popping in. So we'll just let that kind of fill back in as we go. We'll get started in just a minute. Thank you guys so much for coming on this Thursday afternoon. We would love to have been doing this in person, but we're going to take a few minutes here to just let everybody hop onto the call before we get started. All right, Mustangs, we are going to get started. Welcome so much today to our discussion. As we go through the presentation with Jamie and as we go through some Q&A, feel free down at the bottom. You've got the Q&A feature. Also, there's the potential for chat, but please use the Q&A primarily if you have questions as we go along. We will try our best to include as many of your questions as possible, particularly ones that you answer as we go. But I also just wanted to take a minute to say thank you so much for contributing all of your questions the other day as you previewed a little bit more about Jamie. And so today, we're going to hear from Jamie, and he's going to tell us a little bit about himself. But before we do that, we're going to have a great introduction today from Melissa Chang.
Yeah, so hi everyone. It is a great pleasure for me to introduce our speaker. So our speaker today is an avid mountaineer and an outdoor enthusiast who continues to inspire others to see the positive and overcome challenges. Despite being a disabled mountaineer with no hands or feet, our speaker proves to us that you can achieve your goals and pursue your passions even when facing great challenges. Society often overlooks the disability community by creating misconceptions, when in reality, all these individuals have so much determination and potential to make a positive impact on our society, which is why this topic is so important. So it is our hope that our speakers' experiences and achievements may in some way inspire you to tackle the obstacles you face in life and achieve your full potential. So please join me in welcoming Jamie Andrews.
Thank you very much. Thank you. What a kind welcome. So thank you very much for having me today. Of course, I know we are all facing such a tough and challenging time right now, not just because of the pandemic, but for so many other reasons as well. Well, I'd like to, with the next 35 minutes or so, just tell you my story. And by doing so, hopefully I can, well, firstly, answer some of the questions that you've already asked, and I've read through them all already. Hopefully answer some of them, but hopefully also I can show you how I've learned in my life, how I've learned over the last 23 years of my life it's been now, that really whatever you are trying to achieve, whatever the challenges that you face in your life are, and no matter what your goals and aspirations and dreams are, really, if you set your mind to something, if you are prepared to go out and give it a go, no matter what the odds, and simply make the most of the things that you have, rather than worrying about the things that you maybe don't have. And if you can focus on the things that all the incredible people around you have to offer too, rather than complaining about what they don't do. And if you can do that one incredible thing, just to be able to believe in yourself, well, then truly anything is possible. So I just like to share my screen. Give me a moment while I do that. And should start the slides. So up until 23 years ago, I was just a very ordinary person. There was nothing unusual about me whatsoever. I was an ordinary guy going about my business, living and working here in Scotland, which is where I'm speaking to you from now. And really the only thing that made me stand out from the crowd at all, perhaps, was my great passion in life, which was, of course, mountaineering. And every spare moment that I had, I would rush off into the hills and the mountains and go climbing. But apart from that, I really was just a very ordinary person with absolutely no idea what was about to happen to me. Well, it was in January 1999 that myself and my great friend and climbing partner, Jamie Fisher, went to climb this mountain here by its north face. It's called Les Droites. It's in the French Alps, one of the highest mountains in Western Europe. And we went to tackle it by its spectacular and difficult north face pictured here. Well, ordinarily this climb, although very difficult, was well within our capabilities. And we were a strong team. We were climbing well together. We were fit, and we did make very good progress up the mountain. But it was on this one particular mountain that our luck took a turn for the worse, when we were suddenly engulfed by a massive, vicious and unexpected storm. Unrelenting winds of 130 kilometers an hour, plummeting temperatures as low as -30 degrees C, and poor visibility. We could barely see the hands in front of our face. Ended up trapping us, pinning us to the summit of the mountain on a tiny little icy ledge, no more than about a meter wide, right on the very crest of the summit of the mountain, for a shocking ordeal that in the end was to last for 5 days and 5 nights, enduring conditions that the human body just isn't built to survive. Miraculously, on the morning of the 5th day of the storm, I was pulled off the mountain in one of the most spectacular and daring rescues in the history of the Alps. It really was the 11th hour for me. And tragically, it was only a matter of hours too late to save the life of my friend, Jamie Fisher, who died of hypothermia on the summit during that final night. But I survived. And as I was swung off down the mountain on the end of a 90-meter winch line, spinning 1,000 meters now above the glacier in space, I looked back. I was still conscious, remarkably, and I looked back, and the last thing that I saw was this scene here, taken from the helicopter looking back. And it's not a great picture, but you can make out this tiny little icy ledge that we were trapped on in this slight dip of the ridge here, with massive drops to front and back. And the last thing that I saw was the blue suited figure of my rescuer as he crouched over the now lifeless body of my best friend and climbing partner, Jamie Fisher. So at that point, I knew that I'd made it. I knew that I'd been rescued. I was going to live. But I knew also that in no way was this a happy ending, and that I was returning to a very, very different world to the one that I'd left behind just a week previously. Well, I was flown straight to Chamonix Hospital, where I was extremely well taken care of. The doctors, the surgeons, and as you can see here, not least the nurses, not only are they world experts in the treatment of mountain traumatology, but living and working amongst the mountains as they do, they're all mountain people as well. They're all skiers and snowboarders and mountaineers. And so they had a great deal of understanding, empathy for me as a person. And that meant a great deal to me. That meant as much to me as their medical expertise. I was also surrounded by my friends and family who flew out to be with me. In this picture here, my dad, equally my mum, not in the picture. And on the right, most importantly of all, my girlfriend, Anna. So I was very well taken care of.
Apologies for interrupting. I'm sorry. I think for us, as far as the view, we're only able to see the PowerPoint initial slide. We can't see the slideshow.
That is interesting. Okay, what I'm going to do is stop the share. Thanks for this, Mike. What I'm going to do is stop the share. I think I know why this is. I don't know why it's doing it. I'm going to close. Just give me a second. Come on. So I'm coming back to you, don't worry.
No worries.
Because this has happened before. It's something to do with me starting PowerPoint before the presentation started. So I'm just going to start it again once I find it. Okay. Sorry, guys. It's not working either. So I'm going to try again sharing my screen. Okay, can you see that now?
We can see the PowerPoint, but it doesn't want to go into the full screen presentation mode. I'm not sure, maybe it's pushing it to a second screen.
Maybe. I've got it full screen here. Can you see the slides changing?
Cannot.
Interesting. Okay. Because for me, they're changing. I'll try something else. I'll stop that share. I'm going to go straight into that one.
Oh, that might have done it.
Picture of some mountains now.
I do see some mountains.
Okay, and change now. Oops. Now.
There it goes. We're
Okay.
good to go.
Right, we're back on track. So this is the picture I was talking about, the rescue off the ledge. And here is the hospital of Chamonix and the staff that I said that was so incredible in helping me and supporting me through those initial days, and my family. You know, as I said, my father on the left, my mother not in the picture, and most importantly, my girlfriend Anna. So, you know, I was incredibly well looked after, but still, those were such tough days. Those first few days after the accident were really hard, and I just struggled to come to terms with the sudden, tragic and unexpected loss of my friend Jamie. But on top of that, I was really quite ill myself. By the time I was brought into hospital after the ordeal on the mountain, I was hypothermic and I was very badly frostbitten. In fact, my hands and feet were literally frozen solid, like blocks of ice. And you don't get away with that kind of frostbite without some kind of permanent damage. And the doctors and surgeons battled and fought to do what they could to save my frost-ravaged limbs. But in the end, as I started to succumb to septicemia and septic shock, they were forced to take the excruciating decision to amputate. And amputate is what they did. So that's not actually me. You probably noticed. I wouldn't normally compare myself with Greek gods, but this guy, this is Dionysus, and we share the same amputations, 2 below elbow amputations and 2 below knee amputations. So essentially, I lost my hands and my feet. And that was it. Really, that was that. I was to wake up from those operations to look down my hospital bed and see that where my hands and feet had previously been were now only neatly bandaged stumps. And to say that I wasn't prepared for this shock would be an enormous understatement. You know, I couldn't even begin to imagine how I could ever lead any kind of meaningful existence in this condition ever again. And I must admit, there were times during those first few days and weeks when I truly felt I would have been better off just dying up there on the mountain alongside my friend Jamie, rather than coming down to face a life like this. So those were dark, dark days indeed. And On top of all that, of course, I was still struggling to come to terms with what had happened to Jamie, and struggling with some strange and difficult emotions relating to him. Emotions such as anger at myself, anger at Jamie for not having made it down alive, and guilt at having survived when he hadn't, guilt at having got down from our ordeal together when he hadn't. But in the end, it was those emotions relating to Jamie which actually helped me to come to terms, to begin at least to come to terms with what had happened. Because it was through thinking about him, and importantly, eventually through talking about him, that I came to realize that really the most important thing here was that I was still alive. I had been given a second chance. Jamie, who had so tragically died up there on the mountain, hadn't been so lucky, hadn't been as fortunate as me, hadn't been given that second chance. And so I made up my mind that I very much owed it to him, as much as I owed it to everyone who'd fought so hard to save me, as much as I owed it to myself to make the most of this second chance, to just give it a go, to find out what was possible without hands and feet, just to treat it like my next big challenge, to treat it like the next big mountain that I had to climb. And so that's what I resolved I was going to do. I somehow made up my mind that this day here was going to be the low point in my life, and that every day from this day on, I was somehow going to get better. I was somehow going to improve. I had no idea how I was going to go about that or what I might achieve. And maybe I make it sound like it was an easy resolution to come to. Well, of course it wasn't. And it wasn't one that happened overnight either. Indeed, it did take many weeks and months and years, really, before I fully, truly came to terms with what had happened. But the most important step was taking that positive outlook right from the beginning, resolving to somehow find the positive in this situation and bring it out. So with that in mind, I was soon well enough to be flown back to hospital in the UK, in Scotland here. And there I began this amazing voyage of rehabilitation, this incredible journey of rebuilding my entire life all over again from scratch. But at first, I felt in so many ways completely overwhelmed by this whole situation, completely incapable, utterly powerless and completely alone. And there were so many times when I just wanted to throw the towel in there and then before I'd even begun. So I think in retrospect, I was really quite lucky that quite early on during that time, I did come to realize a couple of really important things about this great challenge that I faced. Things that, in retrospect might seem pretty obvious, but which weren't at all obvious to me at the time, and which did really help me to set myself onto that road to recovery. The first thing that I realized about this great challenge that I faced was that, of course, I wasn't facing it alone. In fact, I was completely surrounded by dozens, if not hundreds of people who were there that could and wanted to help me. There was all of the professional staff, the doctors, surgeons, nurses, physiotherapists, occupational therapists, prosthetists, all of these people, each with their own specialized skills and talents, who were around my bedside 24 hours a day, should I need them. Each of them was up for the challenge. Then there was my friends and family, my girlfriend, Anna, who were also around my bedside daily, who were also up for the challenge. And when I began to realize quite how many people there were whose help and support and care and love and encouragement I could draw upon at any moment, well, suddenly the challenge that I faced didn't seem quite so daunting after all. I just had to learn to swallow my pride and accept that help. And, you know, as a previously fiercely independent person, it wasn't easy for me to accept that I couldn't do this alone. I did need the help of other people. But once I got my head around that barrier and did begin to open up, to work with the people around me together as a team, we did start to make some really exciting progress. And meanwhile, the second thing that I was coming to realize about this enormous challenge that I faced was that, of course, it didn't have to be one big challenge, but like any challenge, it could just be broken down into many, many much more achievable bite-sized pieces. You know, so rather than lying in bed all day and feeling sorry for myself and moping about the fact that I would never climb a mountain again, I would just wake up in the morning, every morning, and set myself a goal, set myself a small, achievable target that I felt I could meet that day. You know, so I would say to myself, well, okay, yesterday the nurses had to brush my teeth for me. Well, today I'm going to do that myself. And I don't care if it takes me an hour or 2 hours or all day, because I've got all day. And so I would throw myself with as much enthusiasm as I could into this challenge that I'd set myself. And to my surprise, more often than not, I would achieve that goal. I would reach that target. It might be difficult. It might take all day. It would certainly require a huge amount of support from the people around me, but somehow or other, I would get there. And that, of course, was a small victory. That was one small step further down my road to rehabilitation and independence. That was one small piece of my self-esteem won back. So, you know, in a funny kind of way, I really didn't find it all that difficult to stay motivated during this time, because every day I was winning these small victories. Every day I was going to bed having managed to do something that I couldn't do the day before. So I'm glossing over this massively, of course, but by constantly keeping myself motivated from goal to goal to goal, and with an enormous amount of help from all the people around me, I did learn once more to once again wash myself, dress myself, feed myself, go to the bathroom myself, all of these everyday things. And very significantly, of course, I learned to walk again. Starting out with these crazy, giant, one-size-fits-all inflatable legs, but thankfully, swiftly graduating onto a pair of fantastic, top-of-the-range carbon fiber titanium prosthetic legs. And that experience was just incredible. You know, I mean, can you imagine waking up and seeing that your feet are gone forever and thinking that you'll never walk again? And yet here I was just 3 months later, standing on my new legs, walking on my new feet. That gave me such a massive boost to my confidence and self-esteem. In fact, I was sufficiently well rehabilitated now that I was able to take the very big step of leaving the hospital and moving back home. I still depended very heavily on Anna for many things, but essentially I was able to lead a relatively normal life again. And so I suppose that might be the end of my story there, were it not for the fact that by now you could say I'd become pretty much addicted to this idea of setting myself challenges and achieving new things. And I just found that I was enjoying it far too much to stop there. I couldn't help myself from setting my sights further afield. And I couldn't help myself also from turning my eyes once more to the hills and the mountains that I loved so much. So it was on a complete whim, really, about a week after I moved back home. I I woke up one morning and decided that I was going to go out and climb my first mountain. Well, to be fair, you probably wouldn't describe Blackford Hill, which is in the park in the middle of Edinburgh, as one of the world's most spectacular mountains. But nevertheless, standing on that little peak, which is about 200 meters from the car park, but with this fantastic 360-degree view around all over Edinburgh, I just felt on top of the world. I just felt incredible. And I just thought, well, why not just do this? Take it one step at a time and see where I get to. What's the harm in giving it a go? So that's exactly what I did. Starting out with the smallest hill in Scotland, I just started working my way up bigger hills one step at a time. And to my surprise, only a year later, I found myself here on the slopes of Ben Nevis, the biggest hill in Scotland and the UK. Not a massive mountain on a world scale still, it's 1,400 meters, but hard, rough hiking from sea level to summit. And so that was a long, hard slog. But I did keep going, did eventually make it to the summit. And here I am, pictured on the top alongside Anna, who I'm very happy to say about a fortnight later, I was to get married to. So a much more important reason for celebrating then. And, I don't think I can even do Anna justice in this presentation. I wouldn't be standing here speaking to you now if I hadn't been for all of the care and support and love that I've had from her throughout all of this and still do. Despite it being me that gets all the attention, it has been very much a journey that we've made together. And so then at the same time as all this training from my hill walking I was doing, I was becoming almost zealous in my drive to achieve new things and to get back into all the outdoor pursuits and activities that I'd so much loved doing before my accident. And I just started to take the attitude that whatever it was my friends were doing, I would just go along with them and just give it a go and find out what was possible without hands and feet. So forgive me for going quite quickly through these, but I've got a few examples here of some of the things I got up to. Starting out with cross-country skiing. I've always been a passionate skier. And as with so many things, despite my worries, in the end, it proved to be simply a case of going out and giving it a go, pulling on a pair of ski boots, clipping on a pair of skis, and off I went skiing. They worked absolutely fine. So encouraged by that success, I thought, great, next I'm going to try snowboarding. And once again, I clipped a snowboard onto my feet and went snowboarding. Quite literally, in fact. I didn't even bother wearing any boots on this occasion. I just went in my shoes because I thought, well, I'm not going to get cold feet. So I was gradually realizing there's a few advantages of being an amputee, and no more cold toes. That's definitely one of them. From there, I plucked up the courage to try what I thought would be impossible without hands and feet, which was downhill skiing. But once again, when I actually gave it a go, it proved to be absolutely fine. Better than fine, in fact, because I was forced by my physical limitations, but by my disability, to really focus on my technique, to really focus on what the skis were designed to do. So much so, in fact, that within a couple of years, I found I was actually skiing better than I had been before the accident. So really starting to find ways of turning my weaknesses into strengths. Running has also been a passion throughout my life, and with this fantastic technology, the carbon fiber running legs, it was only 6 months before I was able to run again. And 2 years, I think 2 years, 6 months before I completed the London Marathon, which was a long, grueling, painful few hours, but at least I finished on the same day as everybody else, and that was a big achievement for me. I also took up some new sports, so I learned to sail, and a few years ago I sailed across the North Sea from Norway to Scotland as part of an all amputee crew. So you can see there's 3 of us here with 3 hands and 3 feet between us, but thankfully that was enough. And despite a very rough crossing, we did make a very respectable 48 hours from Norway to Scotland, which was very exciting indeed. Shortly after that, perhaps most grueling of all, I undertook an Ironman triathlon. An Ironman involves, let me see, a 3.8 kilometer swim. That's 2.4 miles, followed by a 180 kilometer cycle. That's a 120 mile cycle, and then finished off with a full 42.2 kilometer, 26.2 mile marathon. So that was an epic 24-hour day on the go non-stop. And that was just, well, awful is the best way I can describe that. Just horrendous. But, you know, once you've done something like that, nobody can ever take it away from you. You know, that's your achievement for life. So that was my motivation. Plus, we also raised an awful lot of money for charity too. So that was a massive bonus. But I haven't mentioned the one activity that was closest to my heart, the one activity that, well, I dreamed about really. But I was sure in my heart was impossible without hands and feet. And that was, of course, climbing, rock climbing. I mean, hands and feet are essential to clinging to a vertical rock face. Or so I thought, until once again, I just went ahead and gave it a go. And to my astonishment, as much as to anybody else's, I found I could invent new ways of clinging on to that rock face and clambering upwards. And it worked remarkably well. I was soon managing quite difficult rock climbs. And that for me was fantastic, being with my friends in the open air, doing what I love the most. Next up, though, I thought that's rock climbing. What about ice climbing? So to go ice climbing, you need to be able to hold 2 ice axes. So that was another visit to go and see my poor, long-suffering prosthetists and persuade them to design and build Britain's first pair of national health ice axes. And here they are in operation, climbing up a frozen waterfall in Scotland a few years ago. So now that I was rock climbing again, ice climbing, climbing the biggest mountain in the UK, well, I started to think that all the skills were in place now. All the pieces were there for me to be able to write what I considered to be the final chapter in this circle, to return to climb once more in the mountains where it all happened in the first place, to climb again in the mountains of the French and Swiss and Italian Alps. So that was an amazing experience. Of course, it was hard. It was hard physically. It was hard mentally and emotionally too, but it was important to me. It was part of my process of healing, of coming to terms with what had happened. And it was also great to be able to go back and climb with so many of the people involved in my story out there. You know, the rescuers, the doctors and surgeons and nurses. As I said, many of them were mountaineers themselves. Many of them had felt at the time, as I had, that this whole sorry affair had been an abject failure, that I would have been better off dying on the mountain. And so it was important for me to go back, to climb with those people, to, in my own way, thank them and show them that their efforts hadn't been to no avail, that an active person can still lead a rich and rewarding life, almost no matter what. So since those early days, I've been back out climbing in the mountains and skiing more times than I could count. I'm going to briefly mention one mountain, though, that meant a lot to me. This mountain here, one of the most iconic mountains in the world, the Matterhorn in Switzerland, on the Swiss-Italian border, as it happens. And one which, well, I never even dreamt for many years would be possible without hands and feet. But it is amazing, I think, how often with what starts out as an idle thought, if you let it linger long enough up here, it can grow and develop and sprout, and before you know it, you've got a dream. And well, then I always think once you've got a dream, once you dare to express it, then it becomes a whole lot easier to achieve, because then you just do all the things that worked for you last time. You just start planning, start preparing, start trying things out and failing, putting in place all the things that you need, working towards it one step at a time. So I'm not going to tell you the full story of that here, but enough to say that it was a very difficult challenge. It did take a long time, but with patience and perseverance, I thankfully didn't give up. And on the 4th of August 2016, I found myself in the right place at the right time, with the right equipment and the right training and the right people and the right weather forecast, and climbing the Matterhorn that day without hands and feet turned out to be easy, turned out to be a pure joy, because the hard work had already been done. You know, the hard work was just getting to the bottom of the mountain. Climbing to the top was just, well, the icing on the cake, really. And there I am standing between my great guides and friends, Steve Jones and Steve Monks, you know, feeling that I've proved to myself yet again, and others too, I hope, that if I only dare to dream big, but start small and work towards it one step at a time, I can achieve even the biggest of ambitions. So that's my mountaineering career to date. However, the biggest challenge that I've had to face in my life, I'm yet to even mention. The biggest challenge by far, in fact, was, and still is, of course, these 3 people here. These are my 3 kids. They're a bit older than this now, but on the left is Iris, who's now 17. And on the right, the twins, Liam and Alex, a boy and a girl, they're 15. And believe me, they're a hell of a big challenge. I mean, climbing mountains without hands and feet turns out to be easy compared to just bringing up 3 normal, healthy kids. In fact, you probably don't even want to know about changing diapers with my teeth. But the important point is that life goes on. If I had died up there on the mountain, well, these 3 guys would never have even got the chance to go on and experience this incredible gift that we all have called life. So, you know, it's worth, to me, just keeping these things in perspective, remembering what I'm doing it all for in the first place. And it's so easy to get lost in all the difficulties we face and the challenges. But what's the inspiration in your life that encourages you and pushes you to take on the challenges that you do? What's that inspiration? Well, for me, it will always be my family. So that is my story. I've tried to rush through as quickly as possible to give as much time for questions as we can. And, you know, I realize that mountaineering is not everybody's cup of tea. But what I said at the beginning was important. I was just an ordinary person. I had no idea any of this was going to happen to me. And so I've come to believe that actually everybody has great strength. Everybody has enormous potential. Sometimes, you know, it takes great adversity to bring that out, but it doesn't have to be that way if you can learn simply to make the most of the things that you have. If you can learn to make the most of all the wonderful people around you, and if you can learn to believe in yourself, well, then anything becomes possible. So I'd love to answer your questions, but in the meantime, I'll say thank you once again. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you for inviting me, and all the best to all of you.
Thank you so much, Jamie.
I will unshare as well.
Thank you so much. That is truly an amazing story. And maybe offline, I'll ask you more about changing diapers, but we've got a lot of good questions coming in. But before we kind of transition to questions, I do just want to remind our students, this is also kind of a potential lunchtime, right? So make sure during this time, as we're going through Q&A, like make sure you step off to the side, grab yourself some food, and we're going to kind of jump into questions. But yeah, just make sure you get lunch before we have your next class. Okay. A couple of the ones I do want to just kind of touch, there's a couple of them that came in kind of during the course of the session that I want to make sure I kind of cover too. And this was one that maybe, you can kind of, there's a couple of them, but like, how do you deal with some of the equipment, the technology, getting your shoes and boots on, like for all those different kind of activities that you engage in?
But basically, it's all about solving one problem at a time and not being overwhelmed. So, when I first lay there in a hospital bed, how do I do anything with this? But you tackle the problems one step at a time. So you go, well, what do I want to do? What's the problem I want to solve? Is it pick up the glass and drink? Well, how'd you do that? Well, you could use a straw. That's one way of doing it. Or learning to pick up the glass with my stumps. That one's got pens in it, so I'm not going to drink from it. But it's all a question of solving one problem at a time and breaking it down. And sometimes the solution is already there, like the straw. Sometimes it's something I've got to learn, like picking up the glass. And sometimes it's something I've got to design and build myself. But I don't let those things overwhelm me. I just take my time and one step at a time solve each little problem. And soon you find that what was difficult in the beginning becomes easy. So picking up that glass there used to be very difficult for me with these big, clumsy, slippery stumps. Nowadays it's easy because I've practiced so much. So that would be my best answer. But breaking it down one step at a time.
And then Melissa, if you want to take the next question.
Yeah, of course. Okay. How do you think that your journey with climbing has changed before and after the incident?
How is what about my climbing?
Your journey with climbing.
It's a very different thing. So when I was before the accident, I was kind of young and very fit and at the top of my game and quite a high level climber. Since the accident, the level of my climbing is much lower, and but it's a very different challenge because this is new. I'm the only person that's the only quadruple amputee that's doing this, that's climbing mountains. So it's just as challenging, but in a very different way, because I'm having to find new solutions to, how do I even use the equipment? How do I use the carabiners and the ropes and the harnesses? Whereas before, although I was a very good climber, I was just just buy the equipment, use it as the manufacturer intends. Nowadays, I'm having to solve all those problems. So maybe that's a good way of summarizing. It's now much more about problem solving than it is about technically hard, physically difficult climbing.
We have a bunch of questions, and I have a few of them too, but we had a lot of them around like mindset. And I would imagine kind of prior to the accident, building into some serious climbing, like you build some mental resistance or mental persistence, right? Talk a little bit more about like how for you mindset plays into and both kind of your journey post accident, but also just for young people that are now kind of just getting kind of started, like how did you build into some of that mindset and grit even prior to what happened?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. As a mountaineer, I was generally positive thinking, driven, optimistic, all those kind of things. But it came to me more organically and quite naturally. After the accident, I really had to build it, hardwire those positive mindset ideas into my everyday activity, because I was needing it. I was needing to stay positive every day. And so I think I learned quite a lot, especially in those early days, about how to stay positive, how to stay motivated. And it is, as I talked, it's all about keeping yourself going with these small goals. That really helps. It's important to have big goals too, something to aim towards, whether it's a medium-term goal that you might achieve in a few weeks, or a long-term goal that you might maybe never achieve. Those are important, but then it's the day-to-day steps that keep you motivated and keep you traveling, even if the direction changes from time to time. That's super important. And it's about allowing yourself to have dreams, being able to express out loud, not being afraid of failure. So say you dreamt of running a marathon or something like that. Well, the first step is to say out loud, I want to run a marathon. Tell somebody, or write it down. Then it becomes a commitment. And then once you have a commitment, you can start your journey of working towards it. I also found inspiration in different places. So I took a lot of inspiration from the memory of my friend Jamie, because I knew that he couldn't be in my place. If he was in my place, he'd be doing even better. I knew that too. So I kind of knew that I owed it to him to make the most of the situation, to carry his life with me in everything that I do, and I still do. And I took inspiration from all the people around me who are doing such an incredible job in helping me and supporting me and staying strong, even though they were going through this terrible trauma just as much as I was. Jamie Fisher's family, for instance, were incredibly strong and had the somehow found the ability to be grateful for my survival at the same time as grieving the loss of their own son. And I found that incredibly inspiring too. So those are some of the things. I mean, it's such a big question. I can't give you everything in one go, but those are some of the things that really help me to keep the mindset in the right place, to keep it in the upward direction, but also to allow myself to sometimes have days when it wasn't there. That's okay too. In fact, it's important to have times where you allow yourself to feel angry or negative, because you can't keep it up all the time. So it's important to remember to give yourself some off time too.
Okay.
Hope that answers that question.
Thank you. And then a question that I have is, what are some ways that people can educate themselves on the disability community?
It's been amazing, the changes that have happened over the last 20 years. I think, for example, the Paralympics has been great. And so when the Winter Olympics comes to China in a few months, go tune in to the Paralympics, hoping this all goes ahead with the pandemic, but assuming it does, watch the Olympics on the telly, and then afterwards, don't tune out, watch the Paralympics too. And you'll see some incredibly inspiring athletes who, do some amazing stuff. And it's not just a kind of sympathy thing. It's really good sport to watch. So that's one way of getting engaged, I think. And I think talking about any problem in life, in fact, talking about it really helps. So, if you meet someone who has a disability, it's okay to talk about it, to politely ask, do you mind if I ask you a personal question? What happened to your leg? Or, you know, if you're polite and kind and respectful, you know, there's no reason you can't talk about these things, because normally in society we're reserved and we pretend we can't. You know, you see someone on the street with a prosthetic leg and you pretend not to notice. You just you feel embarrassed to say something or ask, but you know, there's no reason why you can't. So there's another way to raise awareness and break down barriers. So, well, that's a couple of ideas for you anyway.
Thank you. And then I think a lot of people have questions about technology. So this question is about, are there certain accessible technologies that have made it easier for you as you navigate through your life?
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, it's all around me here. I've got, you know, the computer I'm using right now. My standard smartphone, you know, it doesn't have to be specially designed for disabled people, but just, you know, the smartphone has been a revolution for not just ordinary able-bodied people, but for disabled people too, because that's so powerful. You can do so much with that. You know, I can do everything from find information, buy train tickets, translate, speak. I can use it to speak for me if I wanted. You know, it's such a powerful thing. So that's just a tiny, just one example. And you know, speaking to you now on Zoom, well, that's a way for me to communicate without having to travel. So there's another example of recent innovation making our connectivity better for disabled people as well as able-bodied. So everything makes a big difference. My legs, you know, top of the range carbon fiber titanium. That I was lucky that they kind of came out just as I had my accident. So I've always had the benefit of these high-tech legs. But you know, a generation before that, we were on sockets were made of leather, and the legs would be made of tin, and the feet would be made of wood, all that kind of thing. So it's great to see how technology is advanced and will continue to do so. So let's keep watching this space. One day I'll be wearing robotic hands and all that kind of thing. But to be honest, I'm happier like this. So I don't bother with any of the robotic hands. And that's a question that I often get asked. I like my stumps. You've seen me doing a few things. I like to not rely on heavy, clunky technology on my arms.
And Jamie, you talked kind of at the beginning and kind of just about the, you know, after the accident and towards the end about your support network and your team, particularly your wife. And you know, you talked about some of these amazing things that you've accomplished as you've gone on. But you know, as you were showing yourself on a snowboard or even thinking about climbing, right? Like, and you know, I'm sure you turn to your wife and say, I want to go for a climb, right? Like,
yeah.
How does that conversation go just after that, right? Or when you walk into your team, you know, who are designing your specialized ice axes for the climb, right? Do they kind of super on board, or is there like a back and forth where you're trying to get them on board? Talk a little bit about bringing that team along as you come up.
Sure. So, well, maybe it's worth starting with my wife and the people that are closest to me, who you know have the greatest to lose, I suppose. That is a conversation that has to happen. Anna, as always, you know, knows who I am, and I've always been a mountaineer and passionate about these things, and she knows it makes me the person that I am, and you know, she kind of wouldn't have that any other way. But on the other hand, then she does worry, of course. And so we come to a compromise. You know, I don't rush off around the world climbing mountains all the time. I'm very careful about what I do, and I genuinely take safety as my number one priority in the mountains. And when she knows that's the way I operate, then that gives her peace of mind too. And so it's about a communication process, I think. With regards to a wider team, I think that it becomes self-selecting. If you go in with the right mental attitude, you know, you only ever end up onboarding the people that are going to have the same attitude. So, you know, when it comes to prosthetists making ice axes, they love that kind of stuff, because day to day they're making, you know, regular legs for regular people, you know, great life-changing stuff, but knocking the same stuff out day after day. And then someone says, hey, can you make me an ice axe? They're like, oh, wow, well, this is what I'm trained for. This is my engineering degree, you know, this is my, this is where we actually get to innovate. So of course, they're going to be on board with that. I think if you sell someone an exciting plan, I'm going to climb the Matterhorn, can you help me do it? I think it's quite easy to inspire the right people to come on board with that. I think a positive mindset creates an upward spiral just as well as a negative mindset creates a downward spiral, if you know what I mean.
Thank you. Yeah, we have a lot of questions coming in, but unfortunately, I don't think we have time to answer.
We can never get to them all. I can see 25 on the Q&A plus all the ones we had earlier.
We have a lot, but I guess.
Well, that's great. Thank you so much, guys. But yeah.
Yeah. So our very last question of the day is, what is your next challenge?
Well, that's a good question, because, you know, I've always got ideas and plans and ambitions, but obviously the pandemic stopped all that for me, as it stopped for so many of us. And it's given me time to reflect and to be at home more and to spend time with, you know, a lot of time with my family. And, you know, I realize how important that is to me. So I'm in a kind of fallow period right now. I've decided I'm not going to worry too much about all that stuff until the all clear siren's gone off and we can all go outside again, and because every time we try and make plans, they just get cancelled again, and it's just getting tiring. So I'm focusing in the house with my family at the moment, so that, you know, to give them the best opportunity they can throughout all of this too. And then there are some plans coming, but they're not quite ready to announce just yet. But yeah, you'll have to watch this space. That's all I can say.
Well, I want to say thank you so much to Jamie for joining us today. It really has been a pleasure, and I hope for all of you, his inspirational story around goal setting, mindset, grit, and just kind of beginning to tackle kind of small problems to help you as you want to achieve your goals. But more importantly, also to bring that awareness around the disability community, right? And what is truly possible, and what we can begin to kind of achieve all together. So I want to say again, a huge kudos and thank you. And it always feels really strange when we're doing these things, because this is when you get the
big round of applause. Yeah, I can imagine that. Don't worry. Yeah, so I should have the sound effect here, shouldn't I?
I should have that ready to roll. But and I want to say thank you to all of our Mustangs for tuning in today. And we'll hang on to all of your questions and see if we can get back to some of those really specific ones that maybe you guys have. And for Jamie, Japan is on his list of visitation. So maybe sometime in the hopefully near future, we can support Jamie to come on out and kind of join us here and show him what ASIJ in person is really like. So thank you all so much for coming today, and we will see you guys later. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.